Hello, and welcome to Cutting Through. I'm Mitchell Plitnick. I want to talk today about something that's been sort of eating at me for past couple of days. A common weapon against advocacy for Palestinian rights is false claims of anti-Semitism. I've written about this extensively. I've talked about it a lot, and how the issue, the very real issue of anti-Semitism, is weaponized to defend Israel's apartheid, settler colonialism, and genocide in the past couple of years, and how despicable I find that. So, but the power of these claims, and it's a power that's too often denied or overlooked by Palestine rights activists, is that criticism of Israel, anti-Zionism, or even advocacy for Palestinians in general is used as a tool of anti-Semitism to conceal the true nature of anti-Semitic claims. That does happen. It is real. The reason that pro-Israel forces use this tool is because it's grounded in something that does happen, has happened for many, many years. And so people who might be persuaded to be critical of Israel, who might be persuaded to really grapple with the reality of Israeli crimes, are more easily convinced that those claims are false or exaggerated because and are motivated by anti-Semitism. Long before false accusations of anti-Semitism were weaponized to the degree they have been in the 21st century, far-right racist and neo-Nazi groups used anti-Zionist talking points and framing to try to make their theories of, for example, Jews controlling a black army to topple the white people of America from their perch, or that the government was controlled by a cabal of Jews, to make those claims more palatable or more acceptable by saying that, using the phrase Zionist or the word Zionist instead of Jews. That is a real thing. People forget that now because it's so often bastardized in defense of Israel, where anytime you talk now about anti-Zionism, or anytime you say Zionism does this or Israel does that, the immediate response is, oh, you're just talking about Jews. Most of the time it's false now, but back in the day, that used to be much more. It used to. I wouldn't say necessarily it was more common, but it was. But since there was so much less talk about Israeli crimes when I was growing up in the 1970s, early 1980s, there was much less talk of criticism of Israel. So when you did hear anti-Zionist, it resonated as anti-Semitic, and in fact, very often was. It's much less frequent now that that's a real thing. And generally, when it is real, it's coming from the right. But it plays into the Islamophobic trope of Muslims being inherently anti-Semitic and having to overcome a basic anti-Semitism. Those who are not anti-Semitic, they don't claim that all Muslims are anti-Semitic. They say many are, but the basic belief is that Islam, religiously and culturally, is essentially anti-Semitic, and some may even claim many Muslims overcome that, et cetera, et cetera. But it is an Islamophobic trope that plays into this idea that when people say Zionist or Israel, they really mean Jews, when these days, most of the time, they do not. It gets more complicated in this work because the reality is that the U.S. and Israel have a bizarre and unique relationship. U.S. deference to Israel, in many regards, is very hard to explain. It doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. So people turn to conspiracy theories, and conspiracy theories are naturally a part of bigotry, and are particularly a distinct feature of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. So as I recently explained in another video that I'll link to also in the description, this is sometimes evident in the Israel lobby theory that exaggerates the very truly considerable influence that AIPAC and other pro-Israel lobbying groups have in DC to explain why U.S. policy is what it is. As I've said, that theory is incorrect. I know it's incorrect from experience here in Washington, which is not to say AIPAC is an extremely skillful, powerful lobby. Israel has a great deal of influence on our policy in the Middle East for a variety of reasons. But this notion that the U.S. is somehow controlled by Israel is absurd. Um, it ignores so much, but it does hearken to anti-Semitic myths, and I think it's one of the reasons that even people who are not anti-Semitic still, find it a reasonable explanation because there isn't a better one necessarily that they are being exposed to. I've been doing this work for decades, and I've encountered very little genuine anti-Semitism among progressives, among anti-racists, among Palestine activists. I've seen some, don't get me wrong. Um, it's more prevalent in my experience in Europe, and more so even in the Middle East, which isn't surprising since the only Jews most of the people in the Middle East ever see are Israeli leaders, settlers, and soldiers. So that's what forms their opinion about Jews. That's who they think Jews are because they're not seeing any other Jews. In Europe, of course, it is different. Europe has its own set of circumstances. Uh, it has, there has been more violence against the Jewish community in some prominent Western European states, including France, than we see here in the U.S., and I'm thankful for that. But it is a phenomenon that exists. It just doesn't determine criticism of Israel to anything like the extent pro-Israel advocates would like us to believe. And that's always been the case. I mean, I've been involved in the Palestine advocacy movement for quarter of a century. And as I said, I occasionally encountered anti-Semitism? Yes, mostly been from white people, by the way, but um, white and Christian people, I should note, mostly, not entirely. And I've encountered it, I've seen it. It is a tiny minority of people involved in this movement, and frankly, I've seen far more anti-Semitism from Zionists. So, from pro-Israel people, including Jews, but not limited to Jews, by any means. Many pro-Israel Christians are anti-Semitic as hell. And I'm going to say more about that later on. So, um, there's a new twist to this now that really is what I think is something that we need to focus on. And that is on the American right. Um, I'll link to the article that I wrote about this recently. Um, but I've been warning my fellow Jews about this since the closing days of the 20th century. They're not listening. They're still not listening, even while it's becoming the danger is becoming manifest. That these alliances with conservative, racist, Christian in some cases, sometimes secular forces that are at their heart as disdainful of Jews as they are of anyone else is going to blow up in our face, as it always has. I mean, there's a long history of Jewish communities hoping to find some safety and some protection in new countries. And I'm going back to, the pre-Enlightenment days in Europe. Of trying to sort of find a niche in a new country that they work out with the crown for in exchange for some protection. They do, and this is one of the reasons Jews were so often involved in usury and other stereotypically Jewish professions, because those were the ones that they were forced into, and that would provoke hostility among their neighbors, but would buy them some temporary protection from the king or the ruler or whatever, until such time as they became more useful as scapegoats, and then they'd move on, go somewhere else. That is a big chapter of Jewish history, and it's playing out in a different way, but it's playing out again in the United States, where Jews have made common cause with horribly conservative groups. I mean, just look at how a group like the Anti-Defamation League kowtows to the Trump administration, or has for years worked hand in hand. I mean, we're talking, since, 100, since the inception, really, of the ADL, worked hand in hand with the FBI to spy on progressive groups, to spy on anti-apartheid groups, and certainly pro-Palestine groups in the United States. So, that history is there. It's out in the open. It's not a big secret. Um, and it's a mistake. It's a horrible mistake on the part of the Jewish community. Um, Now, I'm not claiming by any means that every right-wing critic of Israel is anti-Semitic. There are good conservative right-wing reasons to be critical of America's policy in the Middle East, particularly if you adhere to the doctrine of America first. I do not, but if that is something that you hold dear, that America, everything about America should only take American concerns into account. Well, why are we stretching our neck out for Israel then? I mean, that makes perfect sense if that's your criticism. But what we've seen in this recent right-wing turn is people who have a history of anti-Semitism. I mean, some of them, are obviously very upfront about it. Uh, Nick Fuentes, is very upfront. He criticizes Israel. He says negative things about Israel, and he's quite clear about hating Jews. He makes no secret of it. Tucker Carlson, by contrast, who interviewed him, likes, clucked his tongue at Nick Fuentes, but this is a man who advocated the so-called Great Replacement theory for years. This is the theory that basically says that a cabal of essentially, again, liberal Jews is what many of them believe, are conspiring to bring in largely Latino immigrants to, again, topple the white majority in the United States and to quote unquote replace them. This is the what we heard in Charlottesville. It was what we heard from the man who shot all those Jews at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh. This is who Tucker Carlson is. Okay, so now all of a sudden he's criticizing Israel. He's criticizing the Trump administration's policy. You'll excuse me if I'm not buying where his motivations are coming from, whether those criticisms are valid or not. And they, some of them are. Some of them, he brings up valid points because there are valid points out there to be made. But it's very dangerous to throw in a lot with an avowed racist like him. Some have managed to convince Palestine solidarity activists and advocates of their bona fides by whining about their quote unquote cancellation because of supposed anti-Israel views, and that was the only reason that defense of Israel was the only reason that they were canceled, as they like to say. So leading this charade is the far-right conspiracy theorist Candace Owens. So Owens claims um, in recent days, she's in the past couple of years, she's been a fierce critic of Israel's genocide in Gaza. She talks the anti-Israel and anti-Zionist language very well, criticizing the genocide in Gaza. She boldly and quite correctly accused Benjamin Netanyahu of killing children and of war crimes. She's right. I mean, this is exactly what Israel's been doing. And worse, starving an entire population. And she talked about that too. I saw her do it. So she's raising good points, and she's essentially co-opting Palestine advocacy language. But is she sincere about that? Is that really where that's coming from caring about the Palestinians? I mean, look, I don't know the woman, so maybe, but I do know that she has a long history of anti-Semitism that has nothing to do with Israel. She's made many, many anti-Jewish, not anti-Zionist, but anti-Jewish remarks over the course of her career. Um, I mean, I think there's just no, there's any number talking about the synagogue of Satan, talking about saying that Leo Frank was actually a pedophile who was lynched and had nothing to do with him being Jewish. I mean, she just says a lot of stuff. Now, recently, this video of hers came out, and I think it makes it very clear. So, so watch this, and you tell me.
American culture, which has grown quite perverse, It's a culture of vices that we are suffering from today, a culture that is filled with pornography, gambling, transgenderism, radical feminism, modern psychology, pharmaceuticals. If you research these topics historically, you will recognize that they were brought to and fought for on our shores by people like Emma Goldman on feminism, Sigmund Freud, the father of modern psychology. The gambling empire is where the Adelson empire wealth comes from, as are many pharmaceuticals, like the Sackler family. These people had their names on buildings in Tel Aviv. The owners of Purdue Pharma, the architects of the opioid epidemic. Pornography. Our boy Al Goldstein took happy credit for that, right? He's the one who notoriously said the only reason that Jews are in pornography is that we think Christ sucks. Catholicism sucks. We don't believe in authoritarianism. Pornography becomes a way of defiling Christian culture as it penetrates to the very heart of the American mainstream. By the way, Al Goldstein was right. That actually has happened. And pornography, if you're wondering, is somehow considered how it became somehow considered free speech. That's because Jewish individuals in America fought for that. Samuel Roth, actually, that's his name, fought for that decision in courts. Transgenderism, go back and try to figure out where that came from. Magnus Hirschfeld was the doctor and the sexologist. So these are the facts, and the facts don't really care about your feelings. So please keep me in context. There's a lot people can learn from me.
So you tell me what that was. What did that have to do with Israel? Nothing. I mean, she starts off with Emma Goldman and Sigmund Freud, two people who long predate Israel and certainly had nothing to do whatsoever with Zionism. Um, of course, Emma Goldman being the mother of feminism would probably be news to Emma, as she, was certainly a feminist, certainly fought for women's liberation, but there were many others who both predated her and were her contemporaries, who were not Jewish. But of course, Candace Owens, who loves that bullshit line about the facts don't care about your feelings, but manipulation of facts don't care about your feelings either, which is what she's doing. She's cherry picking, of course, Jewish people to show Jews as being responsible for what she defines as all of the ills of the United States. So, I mean, and again, I'll repeat it. Do you see anything in there that has anything to do with Israel or Zionism? Nothing. Okay, that was pure Jew hatred. Pure. There's simply anyone who's denying that is kidding themselves. And I've seen people denying it, by the way. I posted this, and you should see some of the responses I've gotten defending Candace Owens, from people who claim to be progressive, have outright attacked me for saying, "How can you say?" I mean, this is as pure bigotry as anything I can say. And of course, the reason they're attacking me, and I understand this, is because they've been taken in by Candace Owens and they don't want to feel like an idiot. So they attack the person showing that they were taken in. And I'm not calling them idiots. I possibly self-deceptive, possibly gullible. People don't like to admit that they've been fooled. So, kill the messenger, as it were. But I think anybody who is taking a reasonable look at that video identifies it as pure anti-Semitism, nothing less, and and certainly no connection at all to anti-Zionism or anti-Israel sentiment. I mean, given the deeply held anti-Semitism of some of Zionism's Christian supporters from the earliest days of Lord Arthur Balfour, who saw Zionism as the solution to Europe's Jewish problem. A point, by the way, in which many of the leading Zionists of the day encouraged him on that point. And by the way, Herzl saw it that way as well. This is how he saw the Jewish population in Europe. Okay, but I digress. That comes all the way up to John Hagee of Christians United for Israel, saying that the Holocaust was God sending Hitler to hunt the Jews and drive them to Palestine, because they all need to go there for the rapture so that we can all be converted to Christians or killed. But he loves the Jews, right? I mean, these are just two examples of many anti-Semitic Zionists, and one could say that Owens was following in a long tradition of pro-Israel anti-Semitism if she were not, veering from that by criticizing Israel. And I think in all of these cases, what we're talking about, whether it's pro-Zionist, anti-Zionist, whatever, we're talking about anti-Semitism. We're talking about the hatred of Jews. Okay, whether it's Hagee, whether it's Balfour, whether it's Candace Owens, whether it's Tucker Carlson, whether it's Nick Fuentes, it's all anti-Semitism. And the reason I find this so important and distressing, I mean, it's obviously distressing to me as a Jew, right? Anything, it's a personal threat to me and my family. So, yeah, I'm obviously going to be distressed. But it's also distressing to me because it is this kind of thing. People who are ostensibly and sincerely, I think, working as advocates for Palestinians, allow somebody like Candace Owens to use this movement as a shield for her anti-Semitism. And that is incredibly dangerous because it will undermine the movement. It will give much more power to these false and spurious claims of anti-Semitism. I mean, I think that's obvious. I mean, Palestinians who have led this movement, who have been the most outspoken proponents, been the most outspoken critics of Israel, been the most outspoken proponents of BDS, have always and consistently denounced anti-Semitism within their own ranks. Look, for example, just to cite one, example, the writings of a man named Gilad Atzmon, who's a Israeli-born British citizen. He, again, Jewish by, if you want to say birth, by heritage. But he has departed from all that, which is fine, certainly understandable. But he's used his platform as a successful musician to spread very anti-Semitic views that he, likes to present as academic and well-founded, but they are not. And he was making a name for himself. This is going back 15 or a dozen years or so. And he was gaining popularity in the pro-Palestine movement. So in 2012, a bunch of those Palestinian leaders came together, including, and these were some of the fiercest, harshest critics of Israel's actions, people who were routinely denounced and called anti-Semites themselves. Falsely, these were the people who were being falsely accused of being anti-Semitic because they advocated for, in many cases, their own people, but for Palestinians. I mean, among some of these people were Joseph Massad, who we've all anyone who's been involved in this knows very well, the Columbia University professor, Nadia Hijab, who I've known for many years, and has been among the leaders helping to create the Al Shabaka Palestine Policy Network. Omar Barouti, who is seen as the head or the leader, there isn't really one, but who's seen as the sort of top person in the BDS movement. Nasir Aruri, another great academic, and I'll point to one who I think should be the decisive in this. It's Ali Abu Nima, of the Electronic Intifada. Certainly, he's been called an anti-Semite many times, but Ali Abu Nima, who in my experience has never uttered an anti-Semitic word, but is an extremely harsh. He is more so than any of the other people I named. He is a man who is impolitic in his language. He doesn't care what in my view anyway, he doesn't really care how people react to the language that he uses when he thinks it's the appropriate way to describe Israel's crimes against Palestinians. That can be very grating, I can tell you. But he is certainly not anyone who would ever be accused of shilling for Israel or Zionism. I mean, the idea is patently absurd. All of those people signed this statement, among many others, among many of the other leaders who signed this statement denouncing Gilad Atzmon back then. And they have been consistently. I've encountered several other public statements where anti-Semitism has been denounced by people like Ali Abu Nima or Ali himself. This is not unusual. This has been their consistent pattern all along. And there is people like to say, well, where is this fuzzy line between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism? There's nothing fuzzy about it. Okay. Anti-Zionism is the criticism of a political ideology. Anti-Israel is the criticism of a state. And you can say that an ethno state that is an apartheid settler colonial state should not be that and should be a democracy instead. That is not anti-Semitic. Okay. The line is not very, very hard to see. Look, whether it's Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson, or Marjorie Taylor Greene, who is another one who is seemingly, I mean, she's turning on a number of issues apparently because of, she doesn't feel like she's been treated right by the MAGA movement and Donald Trump, but whatever the motivation, she's turning on a lot of issues lately. But this is somebody who has talked about how, Jewish space lasers. Remember that one, the Jewish space lasers that started the campfire in the huge wildfire in California, that was Jewish-owned lasers from space that were doing that. She is also somebody who voted against. I mean, I was happy that she voted against the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act, which would have codified the horrendous IRA definition of anti-Semitism that conflates criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism. So I was glad she voted against it. But her reason for voting against it was disgusting because it would have, according to her, what she's worried about is that it would make it illegal for her basically to say that the Jews killed Christ. Um, you know, we need to be wary of all of these people. Okay. Look, in many ways, the Palestine advocacy movement is seen as a quote unquote leftist movement. There's plenty of people who are not progressive, who are involved in Palestine advocacy, especially when we take that global. Okay. You can be a pretty reactionary person in many other political contexts. But if your kinship or your alliance is with the Palestinian people, you will be for Palestinian rights, even if you're reactionary on many, many other issues, even if you're on the right on many, many other issues. So I've always resisted. Now, certainly in the United States and in most of Europe, the Palestine solidarity movement does draw very, one could argue almost entirely from progressive camps, but not exclusively. And I think on a global level, it becomes even less exclusive. And I'm not going to say that every right winger who criticizes U.S. policy towards Israel or Israeli actions and policies does so out of anti-Semitism. I don't think that's true. But I do think when you see people who have a history of anti-Semitism suddenly finding out that the poor Palestinians are so besieged by evil Israel, you might want to ask a question and just see what else they've said in the past. See maybe where it's coming from. You know, if you look to see what they say, it gives away the game. And Candace Owens makes it really clear where she's coming from. And it is not from a good place. And it is not from a place that anyone who truly wants to see the Palestinian people liberated should align themselves to. They should reject that kind of help. Because in the end, it will not help. It will undermine the movement. I'm not saying that's what Owens is trying to do. I'm not trying to say anything like she's a secret Zionist. She's doing what she's doing for her to pursue her own ideology, and I'm sure that's what that is. But she's a danger to this movement, as is Tucker Carlson, as is Nick Fuentes, as I believe is Marjorie Taylor Greene, and as are anyone who comes to Palestine solidarity from a place not of justice and of liberation, but of bigotry against anyone. So that's it for today. I will link to a bunch of the articles and papers that I've mentioned in the description. And yeah, I'll be talking to you soon.